Hi, I'm Dr. Gwyn Erwin, and welcome back to my channel, Healing for Your Life. Today we're going to continue on with our developmental roadmap, and we're looking at the aspect now, the keystone of affect, which is in my model of healthy development. Affect is a psychological or analytic term that means feelings, mind, body, heart, and we're going to be looking at what affects are, and then we're going to be taking a look at how they work inside of us, whether we want them to or not, and then what we can do about that. So there was a researcher many years ago by the name of Tompkins, and he came up with 9 specific categories of emotion. You can look him up if you want. Some of them were fear, anger, joy, disgust, anger, and there are 4 more. So those are categorical emotions. So when you say to somebody, how are you feeling? And they say, fine, that's not a categorical emotion. It doesn't really say anything. It's a more social convention. But if they say, oh, I feel really happy today, or I feel really joyful, or I feel very sad, that is a categorical emotion, or a categorical affect. Daniel Stern, who was a wonderful Swiss psychoanalyst, came up with the idea of vitality affects. Not in terms, he doesn't mean the word vitality necessarily in terms of happy energy. He means it as vital to us. So vitality affects are a very different experience than categorical affects. In vitality affects, the person is talking about their inner world, their inner landscape and environment in which they live. So if you hear somebody, if you hear somebody say to you, oh, I had the most terrible experience, and I felt like I was just tumbling backwards in space, that is a vitality affect expression. If you hear somebody say, I really feel dropped by you, that's a vitality affect. If you hear somebody say, I was just soaring, I was so happy, that's a combination of a vitality and categorical affect. But not only in therapy, but in life, vitality affects really tell the story of what the person is experiencing, because vitality affects are a description of those experiences. Now you'll see how important this is in a little while. I'm going to hold up a chart. It will be posted on the video, but I want you to recognize it just so you can see it. It will be also on my website as a free downloadable. This is called the arousal chart, affect arousal chart. And originally, Dr. Connie Lillis created a version of this, and then she allowed me to expand on it greatly, and she's also expanded on it in her own ways. So what this chart represents is the 2 parts of our autonomic nervous system. This blue side represents the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the part of our nervous system that inhibits or slows down. The red side represents the sympathetic nervous system, which is the part of us that revs up. And the little space in the middle at the top of the bell curve is an open processing state. That's in yellow. Now, in our affective lives, we tend to default to one side or the other. We might be a more sympathetic nervous system kind of person. We get excited, we get anxious, we get revved up, we get very expressive, or we may be more of a parasympathetic side, which is that we dampen down and we are calm most of the time, or we're very settled, or we don't like getting aroused. Now, even though we default in our personality and our temperament to one side or the other, we don't just live there, we can go back and forth. So, quote unquote, healthy living or effective emotional living, we're going to be living in this yellow zone. And in this yellow zone, if you remember our video on states, we go through a flow of states. And in that flow of states, day by day, we maintain a sense of self. And if we get off track, we know how to bring ourselves back. We go into light sleep, we go into deep sleep, and then we return to this yellow place, this yellow space. It's very small, as you can see, but it is the truest relational space. It is the truest space where you can actually be in a relationship with someone else without being informed by a lot of our backstory or a lot of our reactivity or a lot of our triggers that come up. So you can kind of track yourself here. Both sides begin with partial processing. So you may be awake, you may be aware, you may be alert, but you're not fully processing the same way you would in the center of this chart. As you move down, or up actually, the sympathetic scale, as your anxiety increases, you do less and less processing. Eventually, you land in a very agitated, non-processing, chaotic, and disorganized state. On the parasympathetic side, as your emotions that you can't process well are increasing, you're getting more dampened down, you begin to be distracted. And then you begin to check out. Lights are on, but nobody's really home. And eventually, you're going to get very removed from your situation, and you may not go to sleep, but you're going to fall into a very non-processing, very shut down place. Now, the emotions that accompany most of this begin with shame. Somebody is shamed or humiliated in their experience. They may begin by just feeling self-conscious, and then they start feeling embarrassed. Pretty soon they feel shamed or humiliated. Then that's going to go into fear or anger on the elevated or sympathetic side, and ultimately into fleeing or fighting. And on the parasympathetic side, you're going to go into fear or withdrawal, ultimately depression and apathy. So this is just an overview of how we manage emotional arousal in our day-to-day lives. And it's a very good tracking system for you. Remember, these are copyrighted materials, but for your own use, you can make copies of them. You could work with them with your children, with your husband. Just don't distribute them without my written permission. But it's a very good way to track what happens. In a very cliche scenario, a wife might be getting upset about something. She's had a rough day. She might start to cry. She might start to get angry. Her default side is the more sympathetic side. This is why women are so often wrongly characterized as being hysterical, which they're not. They just fall more easily on the sympathetic nervous system side. And her husband may shut down, close the door, go for a walk, because he's employing his parasympathetic side in reaction to her elevation. He is shutting down. Now, ideally with our affects, think of them, this is a model of Connie Lillis's, as the accelerator and the braking system. We all need to become emotionally aroused. We all need to become elevated. We get very excited about something. We get enthused. We get inspired. We get passionate. And that's a healthy thing. But we also want to know when we can bring the brakes in and quiet ourselves so that we can then take our enthusiasm or our passion maybe for something creative or an idea we've had, and now we can kind of switch gears, modulate it, and plan it out so we can actually bring it into being. There are many times in parenting we don't need to get elevated. We don't need to get aroused. We need to calm. We need to quiet ourselves so we can really work with our children with the emotions that they're having without them triggering us. Yes, we want to be able to resonate and empathize with them, but we don't necessarily want to match a 2-year-old's temper tantrum. We want to be able to be calm with them and soothing and say, I understand you're having very big feelings, and oh, they're so big right now. Or if we're with a partner who's very upset about something, I understand, I'm here, I want to listen, tell me about it. And in the process of processing in that yellow space at the top of the curve, you're both going to be able to come back to a place that isn't either sympathetically driven or the excitatory branch or the shutdown mode, which is the inhibitory branch. So this is just a way to conceptualize our affective life. Now, in development, at the very beginning of our lives, we depend as babies and young children on our caregivers to modulate our feelings. So a baby who's newborn or just a few months old, or even a 2-year-old or a 3 or 4-year-old is upset. They're hungry, or they're tired, or they're cold, or they're too warm, or they're sleepy, or they're too excited, and they need to be understood. Now that just doesn't mean in their mind, by the mind. They need to be understood in an attuned, empathic way so that their needs then can be met. A mother or a daddy can say, yes, this baby's cold, let me warm her up. Or she's hungry, let me feed her. Or she's tired, oh here, I'll rock him to sleep. And as parents provide the emotional attunement and what we call regulation for our young children, over time, those children begin to absorb that and take it in, as we learned in our video on internalization and identification, and it becomes their own. So that over many, many years, that young child, as they grow into adolescence and adulthood, can now what we call self-regulate. When you see someone who cannot do that for themselves, we call that emotional or affective dysregulation. And sometimes that is a way of life for people. Often it's because of the trauma that they've experienced and the fact that there was nobody there to help them process in that little yellow zone in a relational back and forth way what they were feeling and helping them process it. Think of a baby bird whose mother masticates the food and then gives it to the baby already somewhat digested so the baby can take it in. This is a model that Wilfred Bion and Dr. Alida Kullman have both used in very different ways to talk about the containing function of the primary caregiver and how that caregiver provides this wonderful containing processing function for the other, whether it's an infant, a young child, a later age child, an adolescent, or a co-adult. And this is how we really meet one another and care for one another, is through the self-regulation and a mutual affective regulation. We will, of course, be tying this into lots of other things as we go, but this is sort of our base model for today on affect. And I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon. Bye for now.